By that point in my life, I had worked in several fine homes of the best reputation, manors built and decorated to impress the highest of nobility. And even I had to concede that Wyndhorn soared above them all. Today on the Comic Book Report, Helen of Wyndhorn by Tom King and Bilquis Evley. Stick around and check it out. Greetings everyone, my name is Dominic and today you're tuning in to the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today I'm excited to talk about one of my most anticipated releases of this year. Of course I'm talking about Dark Horse's Helen of Wyndhorn. Now, admittedly, I've been a huge fan of Tom King for quite some time, between his Batman run, some of his other works, but it was when this author paired up with the incredible artist Bilquis Evley for Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, that I just went to a whole other level of fandom for this amazing creative team. So when I heard they were collaborating again on this series for Dark Horse, well, I've been eagerly awaiting this collected edition. Imagine my joy when Dark Horse saw fit to provide me this review copy in exchange for an honest review. Huge thank you to all those at Dark Horse for sending this over, and I don't know about you, but I'm ready to go ahead and jump on in. First, some quick facts about today's collection. The issues in this volume were written by Tom King, with art by Bilquis Evley. The issues in this collection were published by Dark Horse Books beginning in 2024. The volume itself collects Helen of Wyndhorn, issues 1 through 6. And finally, this is a standard size hardcover collection with nice glossy print paper stock, a sewn binding, and a total of 176 pages. At this time, I'd like to go ahead and issue a general spoiler warning. I will be flipping through the contents of today's collection and commenting on plot points throughout. You've been advised. Okay, and here's our first dedicated look at the cover for today's collection. Absolutely stunning work here. I have to admit, I was sold immediately just by the creators. We have all of Evley's trademark, swirly, dreamy, beautiful style on full display here on the front cover. And as I mentioned, this is a standard size hardcover edition, and we do not have a dust jacket for this release. It is just the hardback book itself. Transitioning to the spine, I have to say I really love the choices here. We've got the Dark Horse logo, the title of the work, we have some ornate design work, a little sword, the creators, and another Dark Horse written kind of statement logo thing below. Absolutely love it, and I love that we retain all the trademark colors, the fonts. Again, it's a beautiful piece, and it looks staggeringly beautiful on a bookcase. I'm so excited for this one. Now on the back cover, we have a little bit of a blurb about the collection. We have some sample pieces of the art. I like that everything's included in a kind of brilliant frame here. We have pricing information, contents, everything that you kind of come to expect on a back cover, but I really like how it's laid out. Overall, no complaints from me whatsoever. I think whoever designed this hardcover did truly commendable work here. Now for all you prospective collectors out there, I did want to spend a moment to examine this book's binding. As I mentioned, it appears to be sewn binding, and even with a collection this small, my book had a really nice eye. The collection laid down extraordinarily well, and the ribbon actually has a bit of a sparkle to it. This was a very well bound, standard size hardcover book. 2 thumbs up from me. Now I did want to go ahead and do a brief size comparison for all of you. I decided to go ahead and stack up Helen of Wyndhorn next to the Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow Deluxe Edition from DC Comics. I wanted to showcase this because it does have the same creative team, and anytime I can talk about that book, I'm going to use my opportunity to. And after enjoying Helen of Wyndhorn, I certainly hope these two collaborate on more going forward. But anyway, the deluxe edition is an oversized format, about the height or trim size of an omnibus edition, so you can see where Helen of Wyndhorn stacks up in regards to the size. Okay, and now it's time to dive into the book proper. After some beautiful end pages, we have like a title page or two, we have a creator breakdown page, publication information page, and then we have the cover of issue 1, which is the same cover we have on the hardback book itself. Now after that, we do have a chapter break. It says chapter 1 after the issue's cover. This is a format we have throughout the rest of the book, which I like. I love that we have an undisturbed virgin version of the covers of each of these issues, and then have a nice little chapter break. It makes me feel like I'm reading a proper graphic novel, which again, I just enjoyed. At any rate, after that, we jump right into the story. And so for the next portion of this video, I'm going to do my synopsis of the work itself, and along the way, I'll likely interject with some more opinions on some of what we have here. But this story begins with the setup of the frame narrative device for this whole story, which is essentially the recordings of the governess who oversaw the education of Helen of Wyndhorn. This is really an interesting frame device, and we get to see it evolve over time, and I'll get to that more in a second. But essentially, a man comes up to interview an old woman who, as mentioned, was a governess for this young woman named Helen. Yes, the titular heroine of our work. Now, her father was a famous author who created a character called Othan, who was kind of like Conan the Barbarian. In fact, you can kind of think of that as almost a direct analog. Her father is sort of a revered and kind of underground favorite in this kind of pulpy sword and sorcery branch of fiction for creating this incredible character. But by and large and in critical circles, he's kind of scoffed upon. Historians and people don't know a ton about his life. We know that he ended his life via suicide, and that's something that's talked about throughout this work. At any rate, this man is interviewing the governess because he's trying to play biographer for this author, but he ends up learning more about the author's daughter, Helen, and then the author's father, whose name is Barnabas. So the story starts with this man interviewing via tape recording this older woman, and she tells the story of how Helen kind of became her charge. Essentially, she was hired out by Barnabas to pick up his granddaughter after his own son ended his life. Now, when this governess shows up to pick up this daughter, Helen, she's actually in a holding cell or jail. She gets bailed out by this governess, and she immediately goes into a bar to get a drink and to smoke cigarettes and kind of just be rebellious, essentially a little bit wild or feral. She's only 16 years old, and yet she's kind of off doing her own thing. But it's up to the governess to bring her all the way back to Wyndhorn, which is sort of the family ancestral estate. Now, Helen doesn't know much at all about her grandfather, has never been to Wyndhorn, and the impression you get is essentially the dad and this daughter just went from place to place. Every so often her dad would write something new, but he was kind of an alcoholic, and it was kind of the two of them against the world. He told some story that her mom died maybe in childbirth, and she was just kind of some no-name whomever, and the daughter wasn't really allowed to read what he wrote, but she'd go ahead and pick up copies whenever she could and read these kind of pulpy sword and sorcery tales about Othan, and she loved it. She thought her dad was better than Shakespeare. And anyway, I'm leaving out a couple little details here, but essentially the two of them board a train and head over to Wyndhorn. They get to this estate, and the butler and kind of second in command around here tours them around this lavish area that's really by a woodland. It's beautiful, it's ornate. You don't even meet the grandfather right away, but we get the tour, and ultimately when they find the winery within this amazing estate, Helen kind of gets drunk and just goes off and does her own thing. By night, however, she does wake up and go to her governess to share her bed because she's kind of really not at home in this huge estate. Now, she's not one to be well-mannered, and she still has to be taught kind of social niceties by this governess, at least the best that she can. At any rate, the plot goes on, and one night Helen thinks she sees something monstrous outside her window. The governess and her go outside and are attacked by this giant creature. But before any real serious damage is done, the creature is slain and beheaded in front of them by a gigantic, massively muscled Barnabas. This is where we get to meet the grandfather figure, who is in every way the embodiment of this incredible kind of barbaric character that the son, Helen's father, always wrote about. It's a really interesting dynamic here that we have introduced. The grandfather is elusive and kind of emotionally shut off, and ultimately they kind of go about this rhythm of the governess is trying to teach Helen. She's kind of abusing substances and just really not wanting to deal with it. The grandfather is kind of tight-lipped about this monster that appeared on their grounds, but eventually Helen does find the grandfather again, this time kind of feeding a young, kind of mythical looking animal that appears to be from her dad's old stories. The grandfather reluctantly says, yes, this is one of those creatures, and kind of invites her into a larger world. Essentially, in this woodland, there's a door that leads to a desert that's basically on this whole other fantasy realm or plane, and from here we have Helen traveling with her grandfather across these mythical spaces for sometimes weeks or months at a time, coming back to Wyndhorn for training and lessons. She learns how to be a warrior, and she kind of just comes alive. She sees that all the stories her dad wrote about were actually about her grandfather in this amazing realm that he inhabited. And she basically kind of finds her place. She eventually gives up substances. She becomes really disciplined with kind of physical exercise and just trying to better herself where she can. And she just becomes this kind of gladiator-like warrior woman. And the two of them have all these adventures. That is until she is injured and the grandfather wants to cut her off, not wanting to lose someone again like the way he lost his son. This grandfather is kind of an emotionally repressed individual, but we do see a lot of compassion he has for his granddaughter. And as the story culminates, we have the grandfather bringing her back to this mythical space. They actually meet or go and find her dead mother's body. It's a really brilliant scene. Along the way as well, we have her meet her grandmother, who's kind of this celestial mythical figure. And just, yeah, I cannot explain how beautiful this whole work is, whether it's the Wyndhorn estate or certainly these fantasy landscapes. Bilquis Evlay's art just absolutely soars. I cannot say how beautiful it is. If you loved her artwork in Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow, you are apt to adore this as well. I think that she was given an even richer sandbox in some ways. We get to see her delve even further into fantasy and less science fiction, and I really enjoyed it. The other thing about this work I like is it was largely set before World War II, which is really fun to have a bit of a period piece here. I do want to tag up a bit. The story kind of culminates with her going on further adventures with her grandfather, and we kind of are left not really knowing what ultimately happened to the two of them, other than they went on adventuring and their relationship got a lot closer. But I do want to pivot now back to the frame narrative, because we do get more in that story at the beginning of each issue and sometimes at the end. But yeah, the man is interviewing this woman and doesn't believe her. At first he thinks that she's messing with him or maybe senile, and he decides to remove all the fantastical information out of the biography. However, as the frame narrative develops, we have him almost haunted by this fact, and he cannot get that interview out of his mind. He starts searching through his personal files, trying to find the tape recordings of those interviews to see if there's more there, or if he missed something, or if he left too much out, and if the public deserved to know more about this prolific pulp writer's figure and his family and where he came from, and ultimately he can't find it. Another frame narrative has his paramour ultimately sell off some of his belongings, including those tapes, basically unlistened to. Further frame narratives go on where that is basically peddled at a fan convention and then ultimately left at a garage sale, and so on and so on. And you just kind of have the mythos of this man who created this amazing, fantastic character and the true story of where he came from and his family and his legacy, but it's kind of lost to time and no one's really investing to listen to these tapes. And ultimately the frame narrative wraps around to have him kind of going back to that interview with that woman again. We get to see like the actual ending of the interview, so it kind of goes back in time, back to the interview. But I really love it because we have this cool homage at the very end of the piece that talks about how this kind of fiction is almost escapist, and it helps us come into touch with parts of us that we all want to relate to, or we all want to have these kind of fantastical moments. And I think it really underscored some of the themes we have here of trying to be yourself and grow and to live a really exciting kind of life in a way, live life in a way that you come alive. And I really thought it was a beautifully wrapped up story. I like that we don't have all the answers, and it absolutely left me wanting more. At the back of this collection, as you've been seeing, we have a variant cover art gallery, which is extraordinarily beautiful as well to see some other industry professionals take their stab at these amazing characters. After that, we have sort of character model, sketch work, kind of background art. I really love this as well. It's great to see some of the process here, some of the rough pencil sketches and work, really just beautifully done. And that really is Helen of Wyndhorn from Dark Horse. I knew next to nothing about it other than the creators, and I absolutely adored this piece. The fact that I'm also making my way through Conan the Barbarian for the first time, both the original comics and some of the newer runs, I really enjoyed it. I thought this was a really fantastic work. But let's go ahead and get to the grade. My comic book dream team is back in full force. Tom King and Bilquis Evlay churn out another modern classic, at least by my estimation. The Comic Book Report is happy to give Helen of Wyndhorn an A. This is an absolute must-read for me. If you like kind of gothic fiction, kind of romantic era kind of writings, or that feeling of kind of lyricism in the work, definitely check out this work. If you're a fan of fantasy or sword and sorcery fiction, things like Conan the Barbarian, this is also a huge love letter to fiction like that. I absolutely loved the landscapes we got to play with here. The characters were all gripping and interesting. I loved the frame narrative. I think this was extraordinarily well constructed, and the pacing. Honestly, there were times that this felt like a coming-of-age slow burn, and yet I was gripped on every single page. This is an absolute triumph for me, a huge recommend. Absolutely adored Helen of Wyndhorn. But that's just my thoughts. You'll have to let me know what you think in the comments. Have you read Helen of Wyndhorn? What about Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow? I would love to hear your thoughts on some of these works, or if you have other favorite works from either of these creators. Let's get some discussions going. Let's get some recommendations going. And again, thank you all for watching. And a huge thank you again to Darkhorse for sending over this review copy in exchange for this review. Until next time, this has been the Comic Book Report. Please don't forget to give this video a like, that comment we talked about, and maybe share it with a friend. Thanks, and have a good one.